Hey, welcome to another episode of Her Thoughts, His Thoughts. This is Donald and Michelle Wells, and we're excited about today. Today is a topic that we have been wanting to do, and you're going to hear a lot from Michelle on this podcast, and very little from me. Michelle has spoken on this topic a couple times, and it is phenomenal to hear her speak on it. So I am super excited, super stoked to have her do it. A couple things that I want to say up front, and then I'll ask Michelle to say a couple things, and then we'll get into it. One, you may listen to this and argue with theology, and we're not overly. I don't want to say concerned with theology, but what we want is we have been able to develop a belief that we believe is biblically based, and we're just going to share some thoughts and ideas on it from that perspective. The other thing I want you to do is remember that you can go to our website, Her Thoughts, His Thoughts. We have updated the website. If you click subscribe there, we'll be able to communicate directly with you and maybe let you know when new podcasts are going to drop. You can also go there and request appointments for one-on-one time to go a little bit deeper into anything that we talk about. And this is one that I think people are really going to resonate. And this is one that I'm looking forward to posting over and over again because I'm excited for the topic. So before I go any further, I'll let Michelle speak and then I'll introduce the topic.
Oh gosh, we this is sort of a summary of what we have built, kind of our lives around and our relationship around, and we both come from failed marriages because we didn't know how to do it right, and so this is sort of the product of us trying to research and study and figure out how to build marriage correctly.
I love that. Because hopefully what you'll hear in this is a lot of research, a lot of work, a lot of just really pressing into grace that God has allowed us, and then also a lot of accepting responsibility, right? So that's a big thing. So let's jump into it. We're about 3 minutes in already, and we're just, this is called building momentum. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, Michelle's going to talk a whole lot about what we are starting to understand, if I can say it that way, as the purpose of marriage. Like I said, a couple of weeks ago, I heard Michelle give this talk, and I was supposed to speak with her, and I looked at her notes, and I said, I'm not going to mess this up. So I'm going to let her go a lot, and just the purpose of marriage as we see it. So Michelle, I'll let you do any additional introductions you want, and have at it. I'm really excited.
So, this all sort of came about because I am involved in a reconciliation ministry at Vineyard Columbus, and so a lot of these ideas and framework came from that ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just been really blessed by it, and it's changed our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think back on it, it's interesting because when I was younger, girls spend a lot of time thinking about what they want their weddings to be like, and what they want their marriages to be like. And I think I had it all pretty well planned out. And I kind of knew that I was going to marry someone who was handsome and kind and Christ-centered and a great listener and an excellent cook and just someone who never minded cleaning the hair out of the shower.
That's what you got.
So I got some of those things. I think I had visions of us being able to travel the world and start a business and raise kids and have dogs, and we'd sit on the couch and be curled up in each other's arms, while the children slept completely through the night, right from the beginning, and watch television. And most of all, I thought we would be happy. And, having this amazing man in my life would make me happy, and, I would make him happy. And this was my dream, and that didn't happen.
And making someone else happy is very difficult to do.
It's very difficult.
Very difficult to do.
It's funny because it was sort of an uncomplicated dream.
Mm.
It was simple, it just wasn't realistic. And so we've kind of gone into this whole in-depth study of what we have come to understand of what God's view of marriage is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I'll be honest with you, it's a process. We're still letting it sink in. But we started thinking, what does marriage look like to God?
Mm.
And, there's an author, his name's Gary Thomas, and he wrote a book called The Sacred Marriage. And he has a famous statement about marriage that marriage is more about making us holy rather than happy.
Now, can you say that again and slow down? And Gary Thomas has written several books on sacred marriage, sacred dating, sacred all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Really good. But one more time, what's his statement again?
His statement is that marriage is about making us holy rather than happy.
Holy.
Holy.
Rather than happy.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So let's talk about what it means to be holy.
There you go. What does it mean to be holy?
So holiness is about surrender. And, surrender is kind of like waving a white flag and saying, I just can't battle against you anymore. It's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And, Donald and I, that's not a skill that we have organically.
Surrendering?
And saying, I can't battle against you anymore?
Yeah, no. No.
Oh, so holiness is also about accepting that God's ways are better than ours.
Mm.
And, I know in my head that God's ways are better than mine, but honestly, sometimes I kind of wonder if he just hasn't thought of something. Like, I feel like a little kid who's going and saying, yeah, but.
Mm.
So I'm a yeah, but prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I think that, his ways aren't good. It's just, yeah, but did you think about actually allowing me to win the lottery?
Right. You have options that you've thought of that God just has not yet explored.
That's absolutely correct.
And one of the problems with not surrendering also.
Oh, absolutely. And, sometimes I just think that maybe he needs my help.
Mm.
And for a long time we've talked about praying really specific prayers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of where it started. And I do believe in praying specifically, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I think it's more about suggestion and how I should be blessed rather than actually asking for God's will to be done.
Now, are you saying that that's the right thing to do?
I do think you should pray specifically, but I think you need to allow for the fact that God's ways are better than anything that we could come up with on our own.
So we should pray
Mm-hmm.
as part of the surrender process,
Mm-hmm.
but we should accept that God is going to put us on a path.
Absolutely.
So real quick, because I interrupted you a couple times, marriage is about being holy, or
Yes.
making us holy.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And holiness is about surrendering, accepting God's ways, and being obedient to God.
Yes, being
Okay.
obedient.
Okay.
And, the biggest thing about obedience is that sometimes it means letting go of things that make us feel good
Mm.
or things that even make us happy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a hard thing. It's hard to acknowledge that God is asking for us to let go of things that truly do make us happy.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because when you make a covenant with your spouse, your marriage becomes holy. Like in that moment, it becomes holy because you invite Jesus into it. And, that's great news because anytime you have a relationship with God, you know that it becomes something sacred and special.
It's fascinating, right? Because we all talk about making a covenant.
Uh-huh.
And we can talk about this some other time. I definitely don't want to sidetrack you because this is good stuff and you know how much I enjoy this. But when we get married,
Yeah.
who are we making a covenant with?
Well, I think it's a three-way covenant.
It's a three-way covenant, but
Yes.
there's only two people at the altar.
Yes.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, and I don't want to get too distracted about this today, but I mean, marriage ultimately is a promise to God.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because, when you think about breaking promises to another human, especially your spouse, after you live with them for a while and their dirty socks are on the floor and they haven't done the laundry and there are dishes in the sink, which there are dishes in our sink right now, which is very unusual here. But it's just breaking a promise to another person. You're like, nah, they'll get over it. It'll be fine. We'll work it out. But when you really think about like vulnerable, intimate relationships, and your most vulnerable, intimate relationship really should be with God. And breaking a promise to God is a totally different thing.
Yeah.
And, it's just accepting that all that breaking a promise to God is doing is just putting space between you and God. And not by his doing, but by yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, not that I want to, look, I could talk all day about that.
So let's go back and
Okay.
let's pick up where we were. So, marriage is about making us holy rather than happy.
Yes.
And holiness has to do with surrendering, accepting God's ways, and being obedient to God's ways. So,
Yeah, and so we're talking about the promise that we make when we make a covenant in marriage. And, it's interesting because Donald and I talk about on our wedding day, we knew. Part of our vows was about when I mess up,
yeah.
I am going to go to you and confess and ask for forgiveness. These are not regular marriage vows.
But they were our marriage vows.
They were our marriage vows because we knew we're going to mess up. We're going to break promises. We're going to hurt one another. But it's my intention, not that I won't do that, but that when I do, I confess and ask for forgiveness.
And notice the word she used. That was the actual word that was in our vows. When. Not if.
Yeah.
When.
So the one nice thing about the covenant, and that you're making it with, your spouse and with Jesus, is that Jesus never fails on his promises. And so you can always count on him. It's interesting because, when you're sitting across the table from your spouse and you're saying, I opened a credit card and charged $50,000 on it, or I have an addiction, or I've been unfaithful, in that moment, confession and repentance and the idea of forgiveness, it doesn't always feel like a gift.
Yeah.
But truly, that is part of what the covenant of marriage is about, is the safety to learn how to do those things that we don't teach in our churches very well. And so this is truly what it's about, is about the ability to make us more Christ-like in learning how to confess, to be truly repentant, which we will talk about that at some point, and then to forgive one another.
A little bit, thy will be done on earth as is in heaven, right? So what we're doing within a covenant relationship, we are acting out and fulfilling the way that our relationship should be with God, right? Because we should be able to be transparent, able to come, because he already knows. All he's asking us to do is to confess. And the difference is that sometimes we think our spouses don't know, or we think our significant other doesn't know, but we learn that eventually they know.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of confession and repentance and forgiveness, that's an exercise for us, not an exercise for God. God doesn't need us to do those things. He is asking for us to learn how to do those things because it brings us closer to him. And in a nutshell, closer to our spouse as well. It's painful, but the pastor at our church did a sermon series a while back about family, and one of the things he said was that marriage is kind of like a gym and a workout, and it's an exercise in learning how to be more Christ-like. And being Jesus wasn't always fun.
No.
So it's funny because one of the promises in the Bible is that marriage is going to be a struggle, and I'm not a big biblical quoter, but it's worth saying that it really is in there. And if you want to look it up, I'll let you do it. It's 1 Corinthians 7:28, but it is a promise that we are going to struggle in marriage. And that's hard to sit in. It's hard to accept, and that wasn't in our wedding vows, but maybe it should have been. It's just that's the ultimate wedding verse, is that you can love this person, but by agreeing to marry them, you are inviting struggle into your life.
Absolutely.
And that things get real. That's really real. And accepting that sometimes marriage comes with pain, and sometimes it's pain because of your bad decision making, and sometimes it's pain because of your spouse's bad decision making. And I guess I'm really good at accepting my bad decision making. Like I can kind of agree that, okay, I did this wrong and I should have done the dishes, or I lied, or, I spent too much money at the grocery store, or I went out to eat 4 times this week at lunch and our disposable budget was way under that, but I did it anyway. And I'm really good at accepting that. But, I can understand pain I've created, but it's so much different when you're trying to live with and learn about pain that your spouse has created for you.
Yeah.
What do you do when your spouse lies or is unfaithful, or like even pornography issues and that taking over intimacy, and or using alcohol or drugs as a way to tune life out? I mean, that's not pain that I understand.
Right.
And I don't have a lot of just natural grace for that kind of pain.
Right, and I think that one of the things that we all have to understand and recognize is that, and it's harder to understand, is that maybe there is an addiction or another issue, and you feel as if you're getting away with it, right? And we feel we're not being caught, we're not being called out, so we're getting away with it. But what we don't understand in that moment is that we are doing damage to a covenant relationship. I know that as I look back at my first marriage, that's absolutely the case. And even in my relationship with you, I know things that I have done that have damaged our relationship, even though they weren't earth-shattering things, right? They weren't huge covenant breakers, but they just weren't in line with what we wanted. So it created damage in our relationship.
Well, and it robs us of the ability to feel the joy that God has intended for marriage. And it just sets us back. And truthfully, it's like, you're working out and you're training for a marathon and you sprain your ankle.
Right. That's a great analogy.
It's not that you're not capable of running that marathon again, but you know what? You just got set back.
Yeah.
And you may have 6 more months of recovery before you even get back to the place where that betrayal happened.
I love that. I love the fact that you can think about an action setting back a marriage, even though it doesn't destroy the marriage. It just sets it back.
It just sets it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so much of what God wants for us in marriage is to be vulnerable with each other, because that's how we build true relationship, and that's how we are able to be free and honest and open enough to experience true joy. It's difficult, though, because sometimes being vulnerable and being honest and being transparent is hard. It's hard to sit before someone and say, man, I struggle with this, or I suffer from this, or, when I have to go to Donald and say, again, I'm struggling with unworthiness, and this is one of my big things. This isn't a hypothetical. This is for real. And, I have to say it again and again and again, and it's just, man, it's annoying to me. So I can't imagine how it feels for me to say it to him over and over again. So, one of the things, though, that we believe in a really great God who is just generous. And one of the things that Donald and I have learned and we hold on to is that God doesn't waste pain.
Absolutely.
And so, so we're training for that marathon, we sprain our ankle, we get set back. But in that healing process, he is refining us and changing us and allowing us to grow in ways that maybe we wouldn't have been able to grow that quickly or in that time frame or whatever. And, one of the great blessings that we've had is because of some of our horrific mistakes in marriage and just in being human and alive and messing up and separating ourselves from God and things like that, we have the ability to do what we're doing today.
Yeah.
And share some of the things that we've learned.
And, all things work out for good, right?
Absolutely.
And in the original Greek, all means all.
Yeah, it does mean all. It's funny, though, because, we think about pain does make us holy. And in thinking about being more Christ-like, no one suffered more than Jesus.
Right.
And so that's part of sort of the road to holiness.
Yeah, it's impossible to be Christ-like without suffering, right? Because when you look at the life of Christ, if you say Christ-like means being living a life like Him, there must be some suffering. And He even talks about, right? You don't want to come where I'm going because it's going to be hard.
Absolutely.
Now I don't know if the Bible says it that way, but that's why I hear it sometimes.
Well, we know Jesus wept. Oh, it's funny though. So let's talk about what marriage does look like.
What does marriage look like, Michelle?
So, marriage it makes you more vulnerable than any other relationship and any other place in your life. Marriage done correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage puts you in a position to trust someone with all the intimate details of your life. It's, you can't hide things from your spouse and have that trust bond.
Yeah. All means all.
All means all. Marriage teaches us to love someone more than our own life. And, that sounds so great on paper, and reading it sounds amazing, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, when my husband's getting out of bed to go work or do something, I love him, but I'll love him while I am sleeping.
Well, and everyone talks about the love for a child is the greatest love that exists. And the unfortunate thing about that love is it is not a covenant love.
It's not.
It's not.
No.
Maybe we'll talk about that sometime too.
And trust me, they grow up and leave you.
Yes.
And we're glad for that. But it's...
You mean I don't get to grow up and leave?
No. Let's work on the growing up first, and we'll talk about leaving after that happens. But marriage requires you to prioritize your spouse above everything else. And that's easy when you're making a list of your 6 friends. But I'm talking about jobs, and I'm talking about even like if you feel like you have a calling to do something, and that God's called you to do something, your spouse takes priority over that. And God will honor that.
No, go ahead.
Marriage, one of the unique things about marriage is it allows God to speak to you through your spouse. And I tell this story, and I'm going to out one of my kids here. And I'm not going to say who, but she knows. One of my daughters will try to get a hold of me. And she will call and call and call, and I admit to you that sometimes I pick up the phone and I see her name pop up, and I'm like, I'll call her back tomorrow. I'm tired. I'm in bed. It's 1:30 in the morning. I just don't want to hear what she has to say right now. It's not that I don't want to hear it. I just don't want to hear it right now. And she's calling, and she's calling, and she's calling. She can't get a hold of me. So you know what she does? She calls Donald. Well, Donald's a much better person than I am. Donald will pick up the phone, talk to her for a few minutes, and then he'll come to me and he'll say, hey, she wants you to know that, and whatever it is, usually it's, yoga pants are amazing at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever. You never know what it's going to be. But God works that way through us. And that, sometimes He's trying to speak to us, and we know He's trying to speak to us, but we just don't want to hear it right now. And it's not that we don't believe that it's good or that we are never wanting to hear what God has to say. But sometimes God needs to get a hold of us when He's ready, not when we're ready.
And there's an element of surrendering there, right? Because we talk about that you're supposed to surrender and love your spouses and things like that. And there's an element of surrendering there. I know that there's been times when Michelle has believed that something was the right thing for me to do. And she's prayed on it, and she has had a response. And I'm like, nah, I don't really think that's the right thing to do, Michelle. And it's not really Michelle that's talking to me at that time.
And it takes some practice, but we have to be open to the fact that God uses our spouse to speak to us. And it's just real.
Yeah.
And if you can't acknowledge that might even be a possibility, then you're really just doing a disservice to you, because God is going to try to use that person.
Yeah. He put them in your life.
Yeah. One of the biggest things is marriage gives us the chance to model sacrificial love. And this is, it's difficult, and it truly does and sort of embody and encompass everything that we've talked about in surrendering and being obedient, but truly learning how to love someone else above what you're feeling or your desire or anything. It's truly about a choice to love someone, even if it causes you discomfort or pain or unhappiness. You know, it's marriage isn't about convenience, and it's not about happiness, but it is about commitment. And you know, we truly believe that none of these things work in isolation. That they all work as a group. You can't be totally vulnerable with someone that you don't have true 100% commitment with. You're always going to be holding back.
There's some couples that we coach that are not necessarily in fully covenant relationships, and every time something goes wrong, the word done comes up. And we're trying to get them to get rid of the word done to move their commitment level.
You know, and knowing that God's design is about, truly about fulfilling us and making us holy. And, you know, holiness ultimately does bring us joy. And I am not using the word happy, because happy is a different word than joy. I do think that we can feel happiness, and God certainly wants us to be in a good place and joy-filled.
And happy.
And happy.
He wants us happy.
Yeah. And that usually our lack of happiness comes from a violation of one of these things that we haven't done correctly. You know, it's interesting, because I just encourage you that as you're thinking about some of the things that are difficult in marriage, that you just continue to pray into allowing God to be an artist with that pain. And that, you know, He has a plan, and He has intention, and if you just ask Him to use that pain to transform you and transform your relationship, you're going to find yourself in a much different position.
So is that it?
That's it for today.
So I love that. I love that, just the initial premise there. And if you can't accept the initial premise, then, I mean, none of it really makes sense. But if you believe that marriage is to provide you with a biblically based sex partner, if you believe that marriage is to shift the heavy to someone else to make you happy, if you believe that marriage is to totally only have a helpmate to raise kids, those are all things that are difficult to put on someone else on a consistent day in, day out basis.
But I do believe some of those are God's plan for marriage.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not necessarily holy, right? So
not in a vacuum.
Not in a vacuum. That's what I mean by, you know, to say I'm going to marry you because, you know, you would be a great mom may or may not be holy.
You might be so disappointed.
I'll call the girls. But I think that it's key to understand, and you and I love the Gary Thomas, right? Gary Thomas series on sacred marriage, sacred dating, sacred search, and just the concept that these things are all these on earth relationships that are moving into covenants are all about being holy and being closer to God than truly anything else, right? Yeah. So
we know this is a hard concept, and you know we're still working on it. We are in process and in progress, just trying to be better with it. But you know, I just encourage you that if you have questions or you want more information or something doesn't make sense or you even disagree, you know, I'll hear that too. I feel free to reach out, and we'd love to talk to you about it.
Right. The places you can reach out is herthoughtshisthoughts.com. You can email us there. You can subscribe there to get more information. You can even decide to set an appointment so that you can get some one-on-one time and we can dive down into this more. So that was fun. I love Michelle's teaching. I love her ability to teach, and I'm excited. So the purpose of marriage, herthougtshisthoughts.com, and we'll see you next time.